My name is Rachel Hartwell. I am 34 years old. 3 months ago, I flew 18 hours across the Atlantic to attend my sister's wedding, and when I arrived at the venue, an elegant barn in the Cotswolds that I had personally secured and paid for with my own money, my own parents turned me away at the entrance. I stood there in the champagne-colored dress I'd selected 2 months earlier, holding the gift I had wrapped the night before in my hotel room, and watched my mother's face show absolutely nothing. No remorse, no hesitation, just a door closing in my face. But before I tell you what happened, if you are new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell now. You're going to want to hear how this story ends. Let me take you back to November, the day my sister announced her engagement. It was a Tuesday evening in Edinburgh. I was in my flat in the Newtown district, wind rattling the Victorian windows hard enough that I kept glancing at them, wondering if the panes would hold. My mobile buzzed with a FaceTime request from Sophie, my younger sister. She's 26 now, recently graduated from university, still living about 10 minutes from our parents in a village called Thornbury, just outside Bristol. I answered the call. Sophie's face filled the screen, absolutely glowing. Behind her, I could make out our mother, Elizabeth, arranging flowers on the kitchen counter. "Rach, I'm engaged," Sophie practically screamed. "Marcus proposed last weekend at that gorgeous vineyard in the Mendips. It was absolutely perfect." I felt genuine happiness bloom in my chest. "Sophie, that's wonderful. Congratulations to you both." "Thank you. Marcus's parents are thrilled. The Ashforths, they own that enormous hotel chain, you know. They've already offered their barn venue. Can you even believe it?" I knew of the Ashforths. Everyone in that part of Somerset knew them. They owned the most prestigious hotel and resort properties in the region. Marcus Ashforth was the youngest son, charming, handsome, the kind of man who looked comfortable in both designer suits and countryside tweeds. "Mum, say hello to Rach," Sophie said, angling the phone. Elizabeth leaned into frame. She smiled, though it looked rehearsed, like she was going through motions. "Hello, darling. Quite exciting, isn't it?" "It really is," I replied. "I'll start looking at flights immediately. When's the date?" A pause. Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Sophie. "Well, don't go spending a fortune on airfare. We're thinking quite intimate, just close family and the Ashworths' inner circle." "Sophie's wedding," I said carefully. "I'm coming." "We'll see how things develop," Elizabeth said, her voice taking on that particular tone she uses when she's made a decision she won't explain. "There's rather a lot to organize, so I'll let Sophie fill you in on the details." She turned away, and Sophie was left holding the phone. We chatted for another 10 minutes about centerpieces and color schemes and venue logistics. I took notes and smiled at all the right moments, but something heavy settled in my stomach. I should have recognized what that feeling meant. What people need to understand about my family is that we weren't always fractured. My father, David, is a good man, a quiet man. He works in estate management, or he did until he semi-retired 5 years ago. He's the type of person who remembers birthdays without being reminded. He still sends me a card every year on my birthday with a handwritten note. But my father is also the type of man who won't challenge my mother in front of others. He's learned, over 36 years of marriage, that it's easier to retreat than to resist. I have a complicated relationship with that knowledge. My grandmother, my father's mother, was different entirely. Margaret Hartwell was the kind of woman who spoke her mind freely, who believed that money was meant to be used to help people, and who absolutely adored me in a way that was uncomplicated and steadfast. When I was 7 years old and my parents told me I was too old to cry, Margaret gave me a handkerchief. Not just any handkerchief. It was white linen with the letter R embroidered in the corner in navy thread. She told me that I could cry whenever I needed to into that handkerchief, and no one else would ever have to see it but me. She passed away when I was 19, and I still have that handkerchief. I keep it in the drawer of my bedside table in Edinburgh, and I hadn't thought about it in years until everything began to unravel. Margaret would have known what was happening. She would have seen it immediately. Sophie is my only sibling. We're 8 years apart, which meant that when she was born, I was still young enough to be genuinely fascinated by her. She was a beautiful baby with my mother's dark hair and my father's gentle eyes. I remember being allowed to hold her in the hospital, and I remember the weight of her, which seemed impossibly small and impossibly important all at once. I helped raise her in ways my parents probably didn't even notice. I sat with her through illnesses. I helped her with school projects. I drove her to university interviews. I was present in a way that mattered, or so I believed. My career has been solid. I work in financial analysis for a firm in Edinburgh called Cullen & Associates. The salary is respectable, £84,000 annually, and the work has allowed me to build savings to maintain a mortgage to feel secure. I'm not wealthy, I'm not part of any elite circle, but I'm stable. I'm reliable. I'm the kind of person that family members typically ask for help when there's a crisis, and I've always said yes, always. In the following weeks after Sophie's engagement announcement, I realize now that my mother was orchestrating my exclusion with remarkable precision. I didn't see it at the time. I only saw a wedding that I was desperate to be part of, and a sister who needed me, and a family that had always depended on me to be the responsible one, the capable one, the one who never said no. 2 weeks after Sophie's announcement, Elizabeth called me. Not Sophie, Elizabeth. On a Wednesday morning my time, which meant it was barely dawn in England. This was intentional. She'd woken up and decided to have this conversation before she lost her nerve. "Rachel, I need to discuss something rather important," she began, her voice taking on that business-like tone. "The venue requires a credit card on file to secure the reservation. Your father and I, well, you know our financial situation isn't ideal after the refinancing last year, and Sophie hasn't been working long enough to have proper credit established." I could feel where this was heading, but I listened. "The caterer requires the same documentation," she continued, "as do the florist and the photographer, 4 contracts in total. We simply need someone with excellent credit to sign the paperwork. It would be a tremendous help to your sister, a gesture of goodwill from her older sister." My fingers gripped the edge of my desk. "How much are we discussing, Mother?" "Approximately £41,000 in total commitments. You'd only need to provide a deposit initially, around £3,500. The remainder would be charged after the event has taken place. £41,000 under my name." My stomach dropped. I stood up from my desk and walked to my kitchen window. Edinburgh was grey that day. The city looked the way it feels sometimes, layered, old, heavy with history and decisions that couldn't be unmade. "That's substantial, Mother." "It's not your money, Rachel," she said with a tone of certainty that made my skin crawl. "It's merely your name on the agreements. Your father and I will absolutely ensure all payments are made. I give you my word." I'd heard her promises before. When I was 22, I co-signed a motor vehicle loan for my father. The monthly payments were £340. He missed 4 of them before my name was on every collection notice. It took 3 years to repair my credit. During that time, I couldn't get approved for anything. No car loans, no credit cards with reasonable interest rates. I'd paid the delinquent payments myself to protect my future. When I was 28, I transferred £4,000 to my parents' account to cover what she claimed was a plumbing emergency at the house. A pipe had burst, she said. It was urgent. She couldn't reach my father. I transferred the money immediately. It turned out to be Sophie's university fees. They'd told the university they would pay it, and then simply hadn't. My mother never acknowledged the deception, never apologized, never thanked me. I simply received a text 3 months later saying the university had confirmed receipt of the payment. That was all. But this was my sister's wedding. Sophie, whom I'd helped through her GCSEs and university applications. Sophie, who was supposed to be one of the most important days of her life. And I was the older sister. The responsible one with the stable position in finance, the apartment in Scotland, the respectable salary, the one who always said yes. Fine. I heard myself say, "Send me the contracts." I signed every document that week without truly reading them. I told myself this was what family required. I told myself that Sophie would remember this. That one day, when she had children, she would tell them about how her older sister had made her wedding possible. Over the next 3 months, the wedding took shape, and I observed it from a distance, like a woman watching her own life happen through thick glass. Sophie created a group chat called Ashforth Wedding Planning. I wasn't added. I discovered it existed when she accidentally copied me on a message meant for the group, a photo of bridesmaid dress options with a caption reading, "Vote please, ladies." I wasn't among the ladies. There were 8 women in that chat. My mother, 3 of Marcus's cousins, 2 friends of Sophie's from university, and 2 family friends I'd met perhaps twice in my entire life. Sophie and I had lived in different cities, yes, but we'd lived in the same world. Or so I thought. I texted Sophie twice, asking about the dress code, my seating assignment, whether she wanted me to prepare a speech. The first time she said she'd sort it and get back to me. Her exact words were, "Absolutely. We'll figure it all out soon." The second time, I didn't answer, and 2 hours later she sent a text, absolutely swamped with organizing. "We'll chat soon, promise." I called Elizabeth to ask if there was anything else I could contribute. "Everything is perfectly managed, Rachel. You needn't concern yourself." No formal invitation arrived. Not printed, not digital. But I rationalized it away. Surely you don't send invitations to your own sister. That would be absurd. She's automatically included. She's family. That's what I told myself every single time the thought surfaced that I was being deliberately excluded. Every single time. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Sophie posted on Instagram a photo from the rehearsal dinner at an upscale restaurant in Thornbury. Sophie in an elegant white dress surrounded by bridesmaids, Elizabeth beaming beside her. The caption read, "My entire family. My whole world." I stared at that photo for longer than I'd like to admit. I wasn't in it. I hadn't been invited to the rehearsal dinner. My hands shook slightly as I held my phone. I considered calling, considered demanding an explanation, but I didn't. I talked myself out of it. Perhaps the rehearsal was exclusively for the wedding party. Perhaps they assumed I couldn't arrange time. Perhaps I was manufacturing drama where none existed. Perhaps I was the problem. I set my alarm for the next morning. I had a flight to catch. I'd requested an entire week of holiday from work. 20 days is my annual allotment, and I was spending 5 of them on this journey. My round-trip ticket, Edinburgh to London, London to Bristol, cost £1,400. The hotel in Thornbury, 4 nights at the village's only proper establishment, £680. The wedding gift, a set of premium German kitchen knives Sophie had mentioned wanting during a casual FaceTime months earlier, £720. My out-of-pocket expenses before I even set foot in the Cotswolds, £2,800, plus the $41,000 in contracts that I had signed, £43,800 total. It was nearly half my annual salary. On the first flight, somewhere above the Irish Sea, I pulled out my mobile and opened my notes app. I'd been drafting a speech for weeks. Nothing excessively long, perhaps 2 minutes. I wanted to tell the story of how Sophie used to make me play wedding with her stuffed animals when she was 5 years old, how she'd always insist I be the vicar, never the bride. I'd always thought it was humorous. I believed people would laugh. I practiced it twice with my earbuds in, whispering into my scarf so the passenger beside me wouldn't assume I'd had a psychological episode. The words felt genuine. They felt true. They felt like the kind of thing a sister would say at her sister's wedding. When I landed in London for my connection, I sent a text to Elizabeth. "Just arrived in London, 1 more flight remaining, cannot wait to see everyone." No response for 45 minutes. Then, just before I boarded the Bristol flight, "Fine. Busy. See you then." 4 words, not a single exclamation point, no safe travels, no expression of anticipation. I stared at that text, while other passengers pushed past me toward the gate. I almost sent it to my friend Victoria back in Edinburgh with a caption asking if the exchange seemed odd. But I didn't. I silenced my phone, boarded the aircraft, and convinced myself everything would make sense once I arrived. 18 hours of travel, 4 words in response. I checked into the Thornbury Manor Hotel at 9:30 on a Friday evening. The receptionist smiled and asked whether I was in town for the Ashforth Sinclair wedding. Apparently the entire village knew about it. I confirmed that I was. She said, "How lovely, you must be a family friend." I replied, "Something like that." The room was modest but clean. I hung my dress in the wardrobe, a sophisticated champagne-colored number I'd selected with extraordinary care, spending an entire afternoon shopping in Edinburgh, and set my gift on the desk. I ordered tea from room service and sat on the bed, my phone in my hand, scrolling through photos of the wedding venue. The barn looked magnificent, absolutely breathtaking, actually. String lights were being installed, tables were being arranged. Everything I'd paid for was coming together beautifully. At 10:47 p.m., I received a text from Sophie. "You here?" I replied immediately. "Just checked in. See you at the venue tomorrow? What time should I arrive?" The three dots appeared, then disappeared. They appeared again, then disappeared. She never responded. I woke at 6 the next morning, anxious in a way I couldn't quite name. I showered, did my makeup carefully, applying foundation with the kind of deliberate focus people use when they're trying not to think about their anxiety, and put on the champagne dress. It fit perfectly. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself, not because of my appearance, but because of the expression on my face. It was the expression of someone who was already bracing for impact. I called Elizabeth at 8:30 a.m. "Good morning. What time should I arrive at the venue?" "There's no need for you to arrive early, Rachel. Just come at the time the ceremony begins." "When is that?" A pause. 3:00. "I'll be there well before then," I said. "Is there anything you need help with beforehand? Setup, decorations, anything?" "Everything is handled." I tried once more. Sophie must be nervous. Would she like to see me before the ceremony? We could have breakfast, or... Sophie is busy with hair and makeup. I wouldn't disturb her. The line went dead. Not disconnected. Just gone. Silent. I spent the next 6 hours in my hotel room. I rewatched my toast. I adjusted my makeup 3 times. I checked the weather forecast 7 times. At 2:15 p.m., I got completely ready and headed toward the venue. The barn was spectacular in person. The gardens surrounding it were immaculate. Cars lined the drive, and guests were beginning to arrive in a steady stream of vehicles and expensive fabrics. I pulled into a parking space and sat for a moment, steeling myself. My phone buzzed. I checked it. A news notification about stock markets. Nothing from my family. As I walked toward the entrance, I saw Elizabeth standing beneath an archway. She saw me, and her entire body went rigid. "Rachel, what are you doing?" Her voice was ice. "I'm here for Sophie's wedding," I said. "You weren't invited." The words hung in the air between us like something solid. Before I could respond, my mother added something else, something that made my blood freeze. She said, "Only family members are allowed." I stood absolutely still. My mouth didn't form words. My brain didn't process language. I was aware only of my own breath, which had become shallow, and the sound of guests arriving behind me, their voices cheerful and distant, as though they existed in an entirely different reality than the one I was currently inhabiting. "What do you mean I wasn't invited?" I managed. Elizabeth's face was entirely composed, not angry, not emotional. Simply resolved, the way someone looks when they've already made a decision and have decided not to explain it. "You're not part of this family anymore, Rachel." I thought I'd made that clear. The words landed like a physical blow. I remember feeling the impact in my chest, an actual tightening that made breathing difficult. My mind reeled backward through conversations, through texts, through months of being managed and maneuvered into believing that I was needed for this wedding. And then I understood. The contracts, the £41,000. It wasn't about needing my credit. It was about needing my money, and then needing me to disappear. "Elizabeth," I started. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't make a scene. You've already done enough damage." "Damage? What damage have I done?" A woman I recognized as one of Marcus's aunts was walking toward the entrance behind us. Elizabeth smiled at her, a genuine warm smile, and then turned back to me. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute certainty. "Your father will explain when you're ready to listen, but you are not welcome here. I suggest you leave." My body felt disconnected from my mind. I could see myself standing there in the champagne dress, holding the wrapped gift, and I could see Elizabeth turning away to greet the aunt, and I could see guests streaming past me into the barn, and none of it seemed real. None of it felt like something that was actually happening. I didn't leave immediately. I stood there for perhaps 3 minutes, which felt like 3 hours, waiting for someone to come back out, waiting for Sophie to emerge, to explain, waiting for my father to appear and tell me this was some kind of misunderstanding. No one came. The guests continued to flow past me. One elderly gentleman paused and asked if I needed help finding the entrance. I couldn't answer him. I simply shook my head. Finally, I turned and walked back to my car. I moved mechanically, my dress swishing around my legs, the gift still in my hands. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands gripping the steering wheel and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed. A text notification. My heart surged. It was from my mother. The message read, "Stop embarrassing yourself." Now I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. Why didn't you confront them? Why didn't you demand an explanation? Why didn't you march back in there and fight for your place? I understand those questions. I asked myself the same ones in that moment. I sat in my car and I thought about every possible response I could make. I thought about walking back inside. I thought about calling Sophie. I thought about screaming. But let me ask you something. When someone tells you that you are not part of their family anymore, what part of your brain accepts that statement faster? The part that wants to argue, or the part that has been waiting your entire life for them to say exactly that? Drop, fight, or accept in the comments. I genuinely want to know which one you would choose, because I think your answer says something important about how you view family bonds. I drove back to the Thornbury Manor Hotel and parked in the rear lot where no one would see my car. I went to my room, removed the champagne dress, and sat on the bed in my underwear and bra. The wedding gift remained on the desk, the premium German kitchen knives that Sophie had mentioned wanting, the only gift I'd brought. I didn't open the box to verify the contents were still there. I already knew they were. I'd chosen them with care. I'd spent time wrapping them beautifully. I'd imagined Sophie opening them, surprised and delighted. All of that was gone now. My phone continued buzzing, not with messages from my mother or sister. But the wedding had begun, and people were posting on social media. I watched in real time as photos appeared on Instagram. Sophie walking down the aisle, Sophie and Marcus exchanging vows, Sophie beaming in her wedding dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids, my mother beside her in the reception line, radiant and proud. My father standing in the background, and this is the image that haunts me most. His expression was strained, uncomfortable, the way he looks when he's pretending everything is fine when it absolutely isn't. I watched strangers comment beneath the photos, "Beautiful ceremony. Sophie looks stunning. What a magical day." 372 likes on the aisle photo within the first hour. 143 comments celebrating my sister's joy. At 5:47 p.m., my father called. I didn't answer. He called again at 6:12 and again at 6:43. On the fourth call, at 7:01 p.m., I answered. "Rachel," he said immediately, his voice quiet and urgent. "Listen to me. This isn't what you think." "Isn't it?" I said flatly. "Because I was just told I'm not part of this family and asked to leave. That seems fairly clear. Your mother is upset about something and she's handling it badly. You know how she gets." "I don't actually," I replied. "I don't know how she gets. I've spent 34 years trying to understand her, and apparently I still don't comprehend how she functions. But I'm learning. Today has been quite educational." "Rachel, don't." His voice broke slightly. "Don't do anything rash. Let's talk about this properly. Come to the house tomorrow. We can sort this out." "What is it exactly that needs sorting out, Father? What have I done?" Silence on the line. I could hear the sounds of the reception in the background through his phone. Laughter. A speech being given. Someone clinked a glass. "Your mother has concerns. She's worried about money, about whether you've been entirely truthful with Sophie about the financial situation." "The financial situation?" I repeated. "You mean the £41,000 I signed my name to? The contracts that Elizabeth assured me you would pay?" "We will pay them, Rachel. That's not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" Another silence, longer this time. "Then, your mother feels that you've used Sophie's wedding as an opportunity to insert yourself into her life in ways that aren't healthy. She worries that you're controlling, or—" I hung up the phone. I set it down on the bed, and I didn't pick it up again for 3 hours. At 10:34 p.m., I received a text from my mother. "We need to discuss this like adults. You're being hysterical." At 10:35 p.m., one from Sophie. "Mum said you came to the venue. I'm so sorry if there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. As if I'd simply failed to understand something I should have understood. As if the exclusion, the managed withdrawal, the humiliation at the entrance, as if all of that was my fault for not comprehending the family dynamics. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I opened my banking app and I found the recurring transfers to the caterer, the florist, the photographer, and the venue coordinator. 4 separate recurring charges that would continue drawing from my account until the balance owed was paid. I pressed the notification for the first one. A cancellation screen appeared asking if I wanted to confirm. I pressed cancel. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed the second notification. Recurring transfer canceled. The third, recurring transfer canceled. The fourth, recurring transfer canceled. I did not yell. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not compose an angry message. I simply sat there in the quiet hotel room, champagne dress discarded on the floor beside me, and I made 4 decisions, 4 presses, 12 minutes of processing transfers and confirmations and final answers. The amount that would eventually be charged to my account if the contracts remained active, £0. The amount that my parents would now owe to a caterer, a florist, a photographer, and a venue coordinator in the 48 hours before those services needed to be rendered, £41,000. My mother's next text came at 11:03 p.m. Don't be foolish. We all make mistakes. Let's handle this calmly. My father at 11:27 p.m. Rachel, your mother didn't mean what she said. She's just overwhelmed. Please reconsider. My mother again at midnight. I'm only trying to protect Sophie. You need to understand that. Then at 12:36 a.m., you are throwing away your entire family for this? By 1:15 a.m., the tone had shifted entirely. My mother, if you don't restore those payments immediately, we will have no choice but to take legal action. You've committed fraud by canceling agreements made on behalf of a third party. That one actually made me pause. I pulled up the contracts on my email. I read through the fine print I hadn't read when I signed them. The contracts were made in my name, as the primary account holder, for a wedding I was invited to. The terms were my responsibility, legally, but also, and this was the part Elizabeth had been counting on, morally. She'd structured it perfectly. I was the responsible party, and if anything went wrong, I would be the one blamed. But what she hadn't anticipated was that I would actually read the small print on the last one, 3 weeks prior, which stated that the primary account holder retained the right to cancel any recurring transfer with 72 hours notice. I had 48 hours before services would be rendered. I did not have to pay a single pound more. I texted my mother back at 1:47 a.m. The contracts give me the right to cancel. I've exercised that right. All recurring transfers have been ceased as of tonight. You have 48 hours to secure alternative payment methods or to renegotiate with each vendor. That is not fraud. That is your responsibility as the wedding organizer. Her response came immediately. You selfish, ungrateful bitch. My father called again at 1:52 a.m. I didn't answer. The calls continued, 11 of them over the next 3 hours. Elizabeth and David alternating, their voices becoming increasingly desperate, eventually bordering on panicked, as they presumably began calling the caterer and discovering that, without payment confirmation, the food wouldn't be delivered. As they called the photographer and learned that without a secured deposit, the photographer had already booked another job. As they called the florist and discovered that someone else's wedding wasn't less important than theirs. I turned off my phone at 4:33 a.m. and I went to sleep. When I woke the next morning, there were 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. I didn't read most of them. But one caught my attention. It was from the florist, sent to my email at 6:14 a.m. We have not received payment confirmation from the primary account holder. Our understanding is that the account holder has canceled the recurring transfer. Please advise immediately, as we have no commitment in writing that payment will be forthcoming. I didn't reply to anyone. I simply gathered my belongings, canceled the remainder of my hotel stay, and drove to Bristol Airport. I had been in England for 32 hours. I had paid £43,800. I had seen my family's true face. The flight back to Edinburgh was during the day. As I sat in the airport lounge, I retrieved my grandmother's handkerchief from my purse, where I'd packed it without thinking. It was exactly as I remembered. Linen, cream-colored, the navy R embroidered perfectly in the corner. Margaret had been right about so many things. She would have known this day was coming. And I suspect, if she'd lived, she would have told me. Some people wear family like a costume, only when it's convenient. I didn't respond to any of them for 6 days. On the 7th day, my father drove to the airport and attempted to intercept me when I landed. I didn't know he was there until after I'd collected my luggage. I saw him standing by the arrivals gate, looking smaller than I remembered, his face lined with exhaustion. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said. I stopped walking. "I don't have anything to say to you, Father." "Your mother wasn't in her right mind. The wedding was stressful. She panicked about money and she handled it very badly, but she's your mother and she loves you." "Does she?" I asked. "Because the woman who loves you doesn't lie to you about whether you're invited to your sister's wedding. She doesn't take your money and then exclude you. And she doesn't tell you that you're not part of the family. Love doesn't work that way." "People make mistakes." "Yes," I said, "they do. But mistakes require acknowledgement. They require apology. Your wife made a calculated decision, Father. To use me for my credit and my money, and then to throw me away when I was no longer useful. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And you made a choice too. You chose not to protect me. You chose not to stand up to her. You chose to retreat like you always do." His face crumpled. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said, and I meant it completely. "I don't want anything from you anymore. That's what's so sad about all of this. I'm not angry. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just done." I walked past him, and I didn't look back. The legal threat dissolved into nothing. Elizabeth never pursued it. She couldn't have. I was legally right, and she knew it. Instead, my parents managed to cobble together payment for the vendors. I later learned they took out a second mortgage on the family home to do so. The wedding happened. The photos were published. The marriage was celebrated by everyone except me. But in Cedar Bluff, which is a small town, the story spread differently than my mother intended. Word got out. Not all of it. Not the truth, exactly. But enough. Enough that people knew I'd funded my own exclusion. Enough that the Ashforth family, prestigious as they were, suddenly found themselves with damaged social capital. Enough that Sophie, who had expected to simply move on with her life, found herself having to answer uncomfortable questions at dinner parties and charity events. The financial consequences were real. My parents eventually paid back everything the wedding had cost, the original $41,000 plus interest, plus the costs they incurred when the vendors had to scramble. It took them 4 years. 4 years of scraped budgets and strained conversations in their home that I would never be part of again. 3 months after the wedding, Elizabeth called me, not to apologize, to explain. She said that my presence had made her anxious because she felt I was comparing myself to her, judging her choices. My life in Edinburgh with my good salary and my independence had made her feel small. She said she'd been jealous of my relationship with Sophie. She said she couldn't bear the thought that Sophie might love me more than she loved her own mother. I listened to all of this without interruption. When she finished, I said, "That must have been very painful for you." She waited for more. There was no more. "Rachel, I'm trying to apologize." "I understand," I said. "But I don't accept it, and I don't forgive you. You don't get to treat me poorly because of your own insecurities. That's not how relationships work." "So that's it? 34 years of family history is just over?" "No," I said. "It's not over. But it's changed, fundamentally. You showed me who you are, and you showed me who I am. I'm someone who deserves better than this. I'm done being available to people who treat me as disposable." I hung up, and I didn't answer her calls again. Maybe you're the one who has been financing someone else's dream while being excluded from their reality. Maybe you're the one who has been told you're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You're creating drama, when really you're just witnessing someone choose themselves at your expense. Maybe you're the one with the parent who won't speak up, who retreats into silence, who gives you the message that your pain isn't worth his comfort. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Boundaries aren't cruel. Boundaries aren't selfish. Boundaries are the only way you tell people the truth about what you will accept. And people will fight those boundaries viciously because boundaries change the dynamic. They change who holds the power. They transform you from someone who can be used into someone who can't. My sister Sophie and I haven't spoken in 3 years. I don't know if she has children. I don't know if her marriage is happy. I don't know if she ever realized that I wasn't in that wedding because I wasn't supposed to be. I suspect she did. I suspect she understood on some level what was happening, and I suspect that understanding has its own particular weight. My father sent me a card on my birthday last year. Inside, in his handwriting, "I'm sorry for being a coward. It took losing you to understand what that cost you. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if I don't deserve it." I still haven't responded. The gift I brought to the wedding, the German kitchen knives, is still in my flat in Edinburgh. The wrapping has faded. The box is slightly dented. I've never opened it. I keep it in the back of my closet where I don't have to see it, but where I don't have to throw it away either. Some reminders are too important to discard. The handkerchief from my grandmother sits in my bedside drawer, where it always has. I don't use it to cry into anymore. I use it differently now. Every time I'm tempted to say yes to someone who has already shown me who they are, I take that handkerchief out and I touch the navy thread, and I hear my grandmother's voice. You can cry whenever you need to, but you don't have to accept cruelty while you're doing it. Drop family or boundary in the comments. Tell me what you chose, because I genuinely believe your answer shapes everything else about your life. If this story meant something to you, if it reflected something you've experienced or something you've feared, hit like and subscribe. There are new stories every week, and I read every comment you leave. Thank you for listening.